What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of? Such big imagination on such a little bud. What's the story, Wishbone? Do you think it's worth a look? It kinda seems familiar, like a story from a book. Shake a leg now, Wishbone. Let's wag another tail. Sniffing out adventure with Wishbone on the trail. Come on, Wishbone. What's the story, Wishbone? What's the story, Wishbone? What's the story, Wishbone? What's the story, Wishbone?
Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What do they get right? What do they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'm joined by guest Rachel Rosing to talk about Joan of Arc, one of Wishbone's forays into the Middle Ages. So, hi Rachel.
Hey Sarah. Can I tell you, when I went to look up this episode, because I just was jumping off my own assumption instead of reality, I went and searched in YouTube for Joan of Arc. Because in my mind, if you're making a Wishbone episode about Joan of Arc, you should do Joan of Arc. And then I couldn't find it, and then I had to go back, and I'm like, oh, it's Joan of Arc. Why not just go all in and say, like, Joan of Arc? Really?
Right.
Double down, Wishbone. I'm disappointed.
Joan of Arc would have made more sense, because for some reason I actually remembered specifically that it was Joan of Arc from when I watched this when I was, like, 9. But...
Well, I mean, I'm going to like time machine. I'm going to talk to the Wishbone creators. I think right. Joan of Arc. That
should have been the way they went.
Yes.
So do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you wanted to talk about this particular piece of media?
I'm a podcast enthusiast, although I'm going to have to admit that since quarantine, I say quarantine, like I'm staying home more because of quarantine, but the reason I'm not working is because I just decided to quit my job this spring. I've not been listening to podcasts as much because I realized they just don't fit into my routine at home in a bizarre way. But I used to podcast actively and listen to more of them, and I'm extremely online, so hit me up for memes or whatever. And a big fan of Wishbone and general PBS youth programming from the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
If you come across like a medieval themed episode of Ghost Rider, like I'm Your Girl.
Okay.
Like that era of programming is my sweet spot.
I was not encouraged to watch TV much as a kid, and so this and the Magic School Bus were like the only things that I watched.
I've never seen the Magic School Bus. I feel like there are certain cultural touchstones that are maybe for the age group slightly behind me that just 100% pass me by. I think that I would, if I had just maybe 1 or 2 years younger, I'd be all on board for Magic School Bus.
Yeah.
Get it? Or like 5 years younger and I would have ever seen an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. There's a lot of...
Right.
I just missed it by a little bit.
At some point when I was in the like 9-10 range, there were, I think, reruns of Wishbone. And I think and Magic School Bus was on either right before or right after the Wishbone reruns. So that would be like my only TV time.
Right. Your programming block.
Yes. Wishbone Joan of Arc stars Larry Brantley as the voice of Wishbone and Soccer as the dog playing Wishbone. I did look up the name of the dog actor.
Very important.
It also stars Jordan Wall as Joe, Christy Abbott as Sam, Adam Springfield as David, and Gene Simpson as Joan of Arc. As far as I know, I'm not sure if any of these people really made it big in a post-Wishbone world.
When I looked at the IMDb page for this episode and also for Wishbone as a series, it mentioned that a lot of the cast for various episodes were just pulled from the local theater scene in, I feel like, I want to say Dallas or Denver. I stopped paying attention at that point. Wherever this was filmed, which considering it's, like a PBS show, it was not necessarily a Los Angeles, Hollywood-based production. I'm going to just find it now here. Dallas. A rotating cast of Dallas theater/stage actors filled the various literary roles. But I do also remember seeing, and you didn't mention her name because she's not, I guess, top billed for the episode, but the actress who plays Joe's mom is in fact the mother of the actor playing Joe.
Yes, that's right. I think I forgot to write her down, but I did notice that they had the same last name when I was looking things up.
And just...
Yeah. That's
my
nice.
own color commentary between the two of them, I'm going to say she's got the acting talent in the family. For as much as I was always a fan of Wishbone the show, Joe is like a real block of wood.
Yeah, the kids in general really feel like accessories to the dog in this episode.
In every episode.
Yeah, well, yeah. I assume. I haven't seen the others in a long time, so this is the only one I'm going to make a definitive statement about. But yeah, they're really secondary to the dog.
Yeah.
Which is fine. We're really all here for the dog.
I wouldn't have been at all surprised to see Joe cast as Anakin Skywalker as a child.
He does have that look. He has the same haircut, I think, as Jake Lloyd.
Same haircut and same wooden demeanor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first segment that we're going to do is the enumeratio or recap, where we'll go over the events of the episode and just chat about it a little bit. So I'm going to start with just a brief recap to orient us. First of all, for those who have not had the delight of experiencing Wishbone as a crucial part of their childhoods, the show Wishbone is about a dog who introduces watchers to works of classic literature by drawing parallels with his own life and that of his tween human owner, Joe, and his friends. This is brilliant, and nobody is allowed to say that this is anything but brilliant.
That is correct. In fact, and I know that one of the reasons that I was in your mind to invite to guest on this episode is because every time Wishbone is mentioned anywhere on the internet, I pop up and make sure that a link gets dropped to the brilliant comedic piece of writing on the defunct The Toast website called The Pitch Meeting for Wishbone. So if anybody is familiar with Wishbone, or in fact is not familiar with Wishbone, I highly recommend Googling The Pitch Meeting for Wishbone.
I think it'll give you a good idea of what Wishbone is and how it is in fact visionary and brilliant.
Yes.
I think there's a line in there also about somebody's like, okay, so are the kids reading the books? And it's like, no, like, can the kids even read? I don't know. Who cares?
Nobody cares.
So in this particular episode, Joe's friend Sam, who is a girl, joins the boys' soccer team, and she is crucial to their winning the playoff game, but their victory is challenged on the grounds of a minor rules violation. This then parallels the story of Joan of Arc, a peasant maid who in the 15th century led the French army to a major victory against the English in the 100 Years of War.
That totally parallels it.
Totally. I think this is actually called out in the Wishbone pitch meeting article, that the person pitching it is like, well, you know, this girl wants to join the boys' soccer team, and that's kind of like Joan of Arc. And then the person's like, is it?
Is it?
So it's a little questionable, but that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It doesn't matter.
No.
We start out in the present with poor Wishbone has lost his water bowl, and it's very sad.
I felt like this opening scene was just about an inch away from breaking into like a Sunny D commercial.
Oh, yeah.
When the kids come in from playing... I get the sense they're coming in from playing soccer, even though they're not, because they're coming in from saying, like, oh, it's such a shame that other soccer player, like, sprained his knee. Right. But it's a real vibe of coming in from some sort of exertion, and they're like, oh, I'm so thirsty. And Joe, like, opens the fridge. And the fact that he didn't, like, pull out a bottle of purple stuff was...
Right.
A letdown.
Yeah, I guess they did not get the product placement together for this episode.
Right. They couldn't get Purple Stuff Inc. to sponsor the episode. Right.
Sam is, in addition to, you know, having her other important roles later in the episode, is the only one who has the decency to notice that this dog has lost its water bowl and needs some water. Including his, like, actual owner. Yes. Who, like, just does not notice this, like, barking, unhappy dog in a corner. Like, come on, Joe.
The fact that Wishbone only barks once to try to get Joe's attention that he's thirsty, but keeps up a running sort of voiceover monologue of how he's dying of thirst, and it doesn't occur to him to bark.
Right.
What Wishbone lacks in reasoning skills, he makes up for in charm. But
yes, and literary knowledge, clearly.
And literary knowledge, but... I feel like maybe just bark a second time.
It also is somewhat unrealistic because I feel like Jack Russell Terriers in particular are really big barkers.
I have a Jack Russell Terrier.
There you go.
You are not wrong. She's very old now and less of a barker because she's very old. But yes, you are 100% right in general.
Yeah, that's at least my stereotype of Jack Russell Terriers, although I have never had one for myself. But as like, there are some dogs who just aren't big barkers. My dog really only barks like at people who she sees it as intruders, but otherwise is very quiet.
Not only are they big barkers, but they're big jumpers. So a more realistic Jack Russell Terrier, if he barked and didn't get Joe's attention, would run up to Joe and jump vertically straight up in the air until he was eye to eye with Joe, and then bark again. Like,
where is the water, buddy?
Yeah.
But he does eventually get the water, which inspires him to describe Sam as champion of the underdog, giving water to the thirsty, hope to the hopeless. Hey, that reminds me of Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
As you do.
Because, and I wrote this down, France was thirsting for freedom.
Yes. It's like, wow, okay.
And then I wrote down kind of a reach. Yeah.
A little bit.
Like,
just a
you
little.
know, France, she's so thirsty for freedom. I try so hard not to filter every piece of media I consume nowadays through the filter of like, oh shit, this is sexist. But the boys are like, oh my god, our super good soccer player on the team can't play, and we're up against the undefeated team in the tournament. And Sam is like, oh, well, you know, the community team I played on, like, won all of our games, and I scored all of the goals, and I'm, like, a soccer maven. And Joe is like, but, like, no.
Like,
and
we're
then,
playing the blast,
And
Sam.
then their other friend, whose name I didn't catch, the other
David,
boy,
I think.
David, thank you. David's like, I don't know. I mean, Sam's team was undefeated. And then after another male has validated the opinion, then Joe's like, maybe it is a good idea. Like, taking credit for Sam's idea. And I was just like, this is every board meeting and Zoom meeting in existence.
There's this really weird dynamic throughout the episode that it's really clear that everybody is doubtful of Sam's ability in a way that is clearly because she is a girl, but no one ever articulates this.
It's called out once, and I wrote down the exact line. I can say it now, or I can wait till we get to that point in the plot.
Okay, you can wait till we get to that point in the plot, because I think, honestly, I might have missed it even. So.
No, I was like, what? And I paused and wrote it down verbatim, because... Yeah. You know, tisk tisk.
But there's definitely a lot of, like, people basically being like, I don't know. And it's like, why are you so skeptical?
People being
of this
like, oh my god, aren't you so nervous? Oh, right. Yeah, it's a lot of that. Aren't you so nervous to play soccer? A game that you've already successfully played a bunch?
Uh-huh. You must be so nervous about this particular game. I wonder why. I wonder why you should be so nervous.
Well, it is the playoff game with the...
That's true. With the blast.
With the blast, yes. I'm trying to remember
so scary.
It's a good team name.
Wishbone identifies his particular source material for Joan of Arc as Mark Twain's Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc, a book which, by the way, I have not read, but when I was looking it up, it is described as the book that Mark Twain said he thought was his best book and that none of the critics agreed with him on.
The thing that struck me about it was that presumably that is... a heavily, at least, I don't know, medium. I didn't do any research. That's at least a somewhat fictionalized account of Joan of Arc. Kind of in the way that, like, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is a fictionalized account of King Arthur's Court. So this Wishbone episode, then, is a fictionalized account of a fictionalized account. So we're getting pretty far away from actual Joan of Arc.
We are. And it's also, there's, of course, this interesting element that, so Wishbone then obviously is the part of the show. He plays one of the characters, but Wishbone is a boy dog, so he always plays boy characters.
Yes.
So they need to find a male for him to play. And one of the convenient things about this particular version of the story of Joan of Arc is that it's Joan's life as she supposedly told it, or as it was experienced by her friend Louis de Conte, who was made up.
Okay, I kind of wanted to ask that because I wondered what the actual historical likelihood would have been in the year 1429 for, like, a single, maybe somewhat lower class teenage girl to be, like, platonic BFFs with a dude who could read and write. And they just were like, pals who hung out under a special tree together being good friends.
Yeah, it's definitely something that Mark Twain made up so as to have, that's his framing device, basically, is that it's all told through the voice of this, guy, Louis, who's Joan's friend, who, as I said, I believe just completely invented.
Like, was my instinct right? Like, historically, maybe unlikely?
It's not impossible, technically, but it's a little strange.
Right. Just seemed unlikely.
That it's especially strange in the context of Joan's trial that it would never have been called out as somebody accusing her of some kind of sexual misconduct if she has this man that she's especially close with.
Right.
And in some ways, that's what I think is the most obvious, is that, like, I don't think she could have had a man that she had that intense of a relationship with in a public way without that being commented on.
And I guess I'm not familiar enough with how the class distinction breaks down and intersects with, like, the gender division, because they do, in this Wishbone episode at least, make mention of the fact that, like, Joan cannot read or write, and she's like a shepherdess or something, right? So relatively lower class.
Yeah, and presuming that Louis is also of the same class, he probably also would not be able to read or write.
Right. I was like, if he can read and write, but is it because he was a man, so he was allowed to learn, and the fact that she couldn't learn was more due to her gender than her class? There's a lot of intersectionality going on in this fictional retelling of actual events.
So at that level of society, and people like peasants, most of them, regardless of gender, cannot read or write.
Yes.
So there are other segments of society where it's more gendered, but there it's just, like, probably really nobody, to be honest.
That tracks. But is the year correct? 1429. They did specifically call that out in the show.
Yeah, that's it's at least, like, it's pretty close. That's the year that she then is at the siege of Orleans. I think maybe she actually left home in 1428 to end her, like, losing a month or so here or there, but, like, I'll allow that.
Close enough. Yeah, I didn't even look up what year anything happened. I did zero research. I figured this would be like a real Beauty and the Beast situation, only instead of a beauty and a beast, it's like a medievalist and a podcast guest who did absolutely zero research. That's kind of the dynamic.
I did research. I spent a ton of time reading through Joan's trial transcript. It was a whole thing.
Yep. I didn't want to, just do what you were already doing.
Exactly. Division of labor.
Yep. So I do feel like in this historical scene, they kind of call out canonically that Wishbone, even though he is playing the role of Louis de Court, is also a dog, because somebody comes into the inn or the tavern, and I guess Joan's dad, somebody tells the man to sit down, and Wishbone says, "Sit down, I know that trick." So is he a dog?
Right.
Even in
There's
this
a lot of back and forth with that he is, like, simultaneously a human and a dog.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's that. There's also that his whole, like, stance and bodily movements when this stranger is coming into their home is very much also the way a dog reacts when a person that they do not know comes into their house.
Yes.
Except less barking.
Later on in the episode, he calls out the English as those English dogs. And
right, it's like,
why are you using dog as an insult?
See, I was just interpreting it as, like, well, it's the English dogs as opposed to the French dogs, with that.
English. Well, Jack Russell Terriers are English dogs.
True. So we've got this wandering beggar who comes in. He talks about how he's basically been made a refugee by the war. Joan has to convince her dad to even let him come in and be fed. And they spend a lot of time chatting about how war is bad and how France needs this hero who has the courage to stand up to impossible odds.
Yes. She mentions that France will be made great again, which is...
Yeah, that hasn't held up.
So, yeah, I was going to like that's real close to a loaded phrase. Mfga.
The poor people in 1995 never knew.
They had no idea. I also would like to give an honorable mention to the wig that poor actress playing Joan was wearing. I was getting such strong vibes of, like, Act 1 fun teen from the Les Mis 10th anniversary concert, like, with the real curly top and the long hair, and I was just like, she's gonna get a haircut later. That will be a plot point, and she'll lose the whole bottom part of that wig, right?
Yeah, in general, I'm just going to say now, I am not talking a lot about the costuming. The costuming is just, it's very, very cheap. And that's really what is the thought process behind this costuming, is that clearly this is like what we managed to find in like the theater department's medieval section.
Yes. And probably was reused if there was a Wishbone Les Miserables episode for Fantine, so they could cut her hair.
Yeah. And there's a couple other episodes that have medieval content. Eventually Wishbone's got some like dog armor happening. I would bet he also is wearing the exact same armor in like the Ivanhoe episode.
Oh, you don't think they came up with two different sets of dog armor?
Absolutely. I would be shocked. It's been a while since I've seen it, so maybe I'll be surprised. But
sure. I think there's also a Wishbone Prince and the Pauper. Is that that's a little later than medieval?
That's medieval.
Is it? There you go.
Yeah, that's medieval. Yeah.
Nice. A good historical show. And there's a Count of Monte Cristo Wishbone episode.
Yeah, that's a bit later. There is also a Robin Hood.
You are going to get to do so much Wishbone
exactly.
for your podcast.
Exactly. There's a lot of Wishbone medieval content.
Yes.
I also just taught the Odyssey, since I teach a general humanities class as well. And now I'm like, wow, I should have made them watch the Wishbone episode of the Odyssey.
You should have. Lesson learned for next time you teach it.
Exactly, to show a clip at least. Joan reveals to Louis that she's had a vision that she's going to lead the armies of France to victory. He's a little nervous about this. He comments on the fact that, well, the French soldiers always run away when they see the English coming, which I'll mention later. And also that she's too young and she should talk to her father. And she's like, nah, I'm going to go talk to the king, because she's not going to let a man tell her what to do.
Yeah. Right, obviously so accurate for the era. You know, all those women standing up for themselves in 1429.
But it is accurate for Joan, actually, that Joan very much was like, no, I'm gonna do this.
In the show, in this Wishbone episode, they mentioned her as being like 17, but she was younger, right?
She was 16 when she first left home and 19 when she died.
Oh, all right. Well, I guess they split the difference.
So yeah, they're about right in terms of her age, yeah. And she first started having visions at 13.
I mean, visions, like period cramp-induced hallucinations, potato.
You know.
I mean, considering the age at which people were expected to start a family in the Middle Ages, and I'm wildly uneducated about it, but 13 would not have been an unusually young age for a woman to have to get married, right?
So it would for her class. Age of marriage tends to have a lot to do with social status. So when you're talking about the nobility, it's pretty common that because you might have a particular alliance in mind, that as soon as you reach a kind of legal age to get married, so potentially when you're 12 or 13, that it would be normal to have a marriage take place then, just so you can actually cement this alliance. In poorer families, you don't necessarily want to get rid of an additional laborer. You might have to get a dowry together, and that takes time. And so given all of those circumstances, for peasant women, it's very possible that you wouldn't be married until your early 20s-ish.
I was just thinking, if you didn't want to be married off, visions from God would be like a super convenient kind of way to delay that.
You would think, but she has a near contemporary, Marjorie Kemp, who is English and who is married, and it's at some point after she gets married that she starts having all of these very intense visions about Jesus and the Virgin Mary. And there is very much this interesting dynamic that the husband simultaneously wants to keep things relatively normal, but also is like, what did I get into here?
I'm just really picturing, like, he's kind of snuggling up next to her in bed, he's kissing on her neck, and she's like, oh, not tonight, dear, I have a vision.
She actually did at some point say that she wanted to be celibate because of Jesus. And she's like, I'm not here for this.
I called it.
So I could definitely see that you would be like, ooh, if I marry somebody now who's got a bunch of visions, like this is going to go way downhill way fast into her trying to persuade me that we should have one of those celibate marriages.
Right, yeah. You don't want to marry that vision girl from down the street.
Yeah, but she never got the chance to marry because they murdered her when she was 19.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Then back in the present reality, we have another scene where, so now the kids are talking to David's father, the coach, who is super hesitant in a way that, again, is so obviously because she's a girl.
Yep, absolutely has to be talked into it. His options are apparently, A, try to go up against the blast in the tournament not having a power forward at all, Or
Right.
B, let this girl be your power forward. And he's like, ooh,
Maybe no one is better than
and
girl.
they basically have to bust out the rule book, and it's like, oh, there's nothing in the rule book that says a girl can't play soccer.
Right? It's also great because you have Wishbone sitting down there. He's like, put me on the roster too. And it's like, this is clearly the inspiration for Air Bud, which came out in 1997, so 2 years after this. So I feel like somebody just watched this and is like, what if they had put Wishbone on the roster?
What if instead of a girl, we give the part to a dog?
You can see his dad's wheels are the coach's wheels are just turning. He's like, no one, girl, dog? Maybe dog.
He's like the coach of the team, and he doesn't appear to really know anything at all about the rules of the league.
He seems to be like a brand new coach. Like, clearly something happened with their old coach, and he got asked to fill in as just like this kid's dad who sort of understands the rules of soccer.
It wasn't like a super thick book of rules and regulations.
No.
They had like a pamphlet, and they're like, it says right here in the rule pamphlet, like, you should have familiarized yourself with that. And they're like, it says in the rule book that as long as you submit her name in writing, that she can be added to the roster. And he's like, I haven't read this rule book you speak of, but I guess.
But sure,
kids,
if the 11-year-old says that that's how it works, that must be how it works.
Must be.
We then have the episode where the King of France is trying to disguise himself, basically to see if Joan is legit, and she's able to immediately pick him out of the crowd, which I will say is impressive. I mean, there certainly would be other people who are richly dressed and who are members of the nobility.
Sure. I mean, I was leaning a little bit towards like, oh, the king would be the one with like the least amount of shit on him and like the best teeth and just generally wouldn't look like, you're like, oh, I bet the guy with gout over there is the king or something.
He's being so he's being compared against people who are of similar lifestyle, I would say. Yeah. It's like, it's at court, it's other members of the nobility, so it actually is mildly impressive.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, you know, especially like, it's not like portraits exactly are necessarily circulating such as you would have seen one.
I would say that it's so impressive, in fact, so impressive as to prove some sort of divine benevolence upon Joan, and obviously she is entitled to command a full army of grown men based on this, and only this.
Yeah, and it is something certainly that would have been considered impressive. I don't know how she did it as a person who was not a person of faith. Genuinely, as I said, I think it is impressive in context, and they clearly found it impressive and as a sign that she is for real in terms of this whole visions from God thing.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before starting to record how as a person without faith myself, I can intellectually know that people are called by faith and driven by faith and follow one another through believing in faith. I can know that intellectually and still find it absolutely wild and cannot comprehend it happening. But just for a teenage girl during a time when women were given nothing by society, for a teenage girl to walk in and just be like, eeny, meeny, miny, king, give me an army. And he's like, deal. It's wild to me.
The spiritual power that some relatively young women can have in this context is really interesting. And so another example is that there's this woman saint, Catherine of Siena, who is actually one of the few female doctors of the church, which is a special designation that Catholics have. And she, among other things, basically talked the Pope into going back to Rome after they had been based in Avignon for a number of years.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's just, she's this like relatively young girl. I can't remember exactly how old she was then, but she's like dead by the time she's in her early 30s because of her maybe not super great habit of deciding to try and live only on the Eucharist. And not eat other food.
I mean, if you truly believe in the Eucharist, you're just looking at a pure protein diet.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the full body of Christ in that.
I know.
But yeah, in practice, it's not a great nutritional decision.
No.
So not totally shocking that she was dead by her early 30s.
I would imagine the body of Christ is not particularly high in something like vitamin C, and she probably got scurvy pretty fast.
Yeah. But she managed to like convince the Pope, who is really a political figure as much as a religious one, to make this pretty major decision. And by virtue of this essentially perception of spiritual power. And it's, and today, I would say even today, there's certainly power that various kinds of charismatic individuals have, even if they don't necessarily have that religious appeal. And so between the religious appeal mattering and the fact that these are clearly people who were in many ways charismatic and compelling, I'm sure.
Sure.
I think that's definitely a lot of where it's coming from.
Yes. And then, of course, because I'm not spiritual, but I am cynical and skeptical, it is hard for me to look at a story of a young girl convincing a powerful man to do something and not wonder, like, how virginal was she by the end of that convincing session?
Oh.
Just wondering. Just idle speculation. Just having a conversation among pals. I don't know. I'm sure it wouldn't have been written down anywhere. It's not like the Pope would have written in his diary later, like, oh my God, right, we're going back to Rome because I met this girl who gives the best blowies. The Pope calls them blowies.
My inclination tends to be that it's unlikely, just because I think if there was even the slightest hint of that, it would have been something that she got called out for, basically. Yeah. So
I definitely defer to your expertise. I'm just here to wildly speculate and smear the names of long dead people.
Poor Joan.
Yeah, I've got written down here, Joan needs an army from the king, so apparently can I play power forward equals give me an army of soldiers to command.
Yes.
It's a perfect equivalence. I could not think of a better or more balanced comparison.
Clearly, no. They're exactly the same, yes. Really.
Also, having played soccer myself as a youth, I mean, not for many decades, but I did play soccer, and it's not like the power forward was like the captain of the team who like was in charge of everything.
Right, she's not really running things.
No, she's just like the one who's more likely to kick a goal.
Yeah.
Soccer is very much a team sport where you can't kind of call out one member of the team and be like, they're the one.
I mean, looking ahead, I actually think the ruling for that reason is absolute bullshit.
Yes.
But anyway. Also, so you can just bring dogs to soccer practice, which is indoors?
I mean, probably. I don't know.
And that seems like something that's not allowed, like that you can't just like bring your dog, who is not a service dog, to this like indoor rec center where they play.
I mean, this was what, like the early 90s, the late 80s, rules were lax. Wishbone is a small, very well-behaved dog.
True.
A lot of places, particularly places that don't have like a health department reason, like if you're not looking at a grocery store, I would imagine a lot of places have the kind of turn a blind eye policy where they're like, as long as the dog's not bothering anybody, like, what am I going to do? Kick out a dog?
Yeah.
It's fine.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the dog gets to be there for soccer practice, of course. And Sam scores a goal, which is the equivalent of winning a battle in the 100 Years' War.
Yeah.
So everybody's very happy. She then goes to school and is talking to her one female friend that she has, who is clearly like also sort of her frenemy and who is dressed up like she's doing Clueless cosplay.
Yes. So it felt almost like heavily Blossom inspired too. Just the outfit, not the attitude. But very, oh my God, soccer, aren't you nervous? She does everything but say soccer with the boys. She's
right.
The big game, and keeps really like driving home that they're playing against the Blast, and the Blast is like undefeated, and they're such a good team. The Blast is so amazing, which frankly, then when we get further into the episode where we have the soccer game, I'm like, the Blast seems like a perfectly average, mediocre team of 11-year-old boys who are not able to like trounce their opponents. And
that's the thing too, is they are 11-year-old children. Do people really take anything this seriously?
So I played soccer it was like 5th and 6th grade. And it wasn't through the school. It was like a youth sports, community sports program.
Mm-hmm.
And no, none of us took it that seriously. I didn't sit around with any of my friends being like, oh my God, the big game is this weekend and the other team is undefeated. Not at all.
Yeah.
Like the morning of the game would come and I'd be like, ooh, I hope I get to play goalie so I don't have to run a lot. Like that was the extent.
Right. And so I was on my middle school soccer team for a year. I was not good. I was very, very bad and eventually stopped doing that. But in my brief time on the soccer team, we had games and people who were on the team moderately cared, but the school wasn't all sitting around talking about how the soccer team was doing.
Yeah. I think my high school people did start to care about soccer, but certainly not at age 11 or 12.
Yeah. So yes, I'm surprised by the intensity surrounding this soccer game.
Yeah.
And she also gets a pep talk from Joe's mom, Ellen. And there's also some other woman who at first I thought was Sam's mom, but I'm pretty sure is not actually her mom. And I think her name might be Wanda, but I don't remember who she is and why she's involved with any of these people.
I think that if you watch more episodes of Wishbone, she is very just like a family friend, a friend of Joe's mom.
Okay.
Who's just, I think she's like, in as much as the world of Wishbone can have like a wacky neighbor character, I think she's it.
Okay. I mean, the wacky neighbor character is clearly Wishbone, but...
Well, yes. But...
like, clearly the wacky neighbors are the ones who have this dog that they take everywhere who tries to teach classic literature.
Hey, it's perfectly normal.
So Ellen reassures Sam by telling her own sports triumph story. So we get to have women bonding over sports, which was actually nice.
Yeah, but it was also really not a fascinating story. It was just like, I played softball in college, and one time I was really nervous for a game, but then I played as best as I could, and we won the end. And I was like, this is a motivational talk?
It's really not that motivational, but it's a nice moment, and I suppose maybe if you're 11 and nervous about a middle school soccer game that in the grand scheme of things does not matter, maybe that's all you need.
Yeah, maybe.
Just someone reassuring you that you can be nervous and it'll still turn out okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than everybody else in Sam's life being like, are you sure you can do this, sweetie? Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That are just being like, yeah, you can do it. I did something once that was involved success in sports. You can too.
Story of my life. I did a thing once.
Yes, Wishbone, however, has the much more inspiring lead the charge and win the battle, Sam, because again, this middle school soccer game is exactly equivalent to the Siege of Orleans.
Exactly the same.
Yes. Yep. So we're then brought back to Joan of Arc. A soldier pops up to report to Joan that Lord Talbot and the English are beating back the French troops. And she assures them that if there's a dozen who are willing to fight and are not cowards, that they will win. And there's like there are 100 who will fight to the death for you. And she goes, not me, for France.
Yeah, which I felt like was maybe their way of trying to hint the direction of like, no, she's doing this for a larger cause. That for Joan, the important part was France. She was not just a weird, power-hungry young woman. It was for France. Yeah, and she had these extraordinarily long, drapey sleeves to her armor.
Which did not, they seemed overly drapey for armor that is meant to be functional.
Really impractical. Like, I have one dress that kind of has bell sleeves, and I never wear it, because they get in everything.
I mean, you certainly can't wear it to eat.
No.
But I feel like you also can't wear it to fight.
No.
We return to the soccer game, and Sam scores, and her dad is very proud, and everybody's happy, and the dog is also still at this soccer game, which honestly, given everything that happens, I'm surprised the blast didn't complain like, oh, there was a dog at the game, it distracted us. That's why we couldn't play.
There's nothing in the rulebook that says a dog can't be at the game. Yeah, no, I'm sticking with my theory of just like, as long as the dog's well-behaved and not causing trouble, it's fine. Yeah. Nobody cares.
But that would have been a fun complaint if he was like, my goalie wasn't looking at your score. He was looking at the dog, and that's why we lost.
I mean, if I was that goalie, yes, I would have been like, I did.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, clearly. Coach. I missed the ball because there was a really cute dog over there.
There was a dog. Yeah. That clearly matters way more than this game of 11-year-olds playing soccer.
Yes. Sincerely, yes.
Dog. Back in medieval France, the war continues. The French are besieging a castle held by the English, a setup that I will talk about later, and thus far are proving unsuccessful. Joan gets shot with an arrow, which they do explain at the end of the episode how they did that.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah, the arrow is made of paper.
I was very just like, oh, just immediately. She's just injured immediately. Huh, it's almost like this teenage girl didn't really have any, like, battle skills. Weird.
I mean, she doesn't. She's just like, God told him to lead an army.
Yeah. And she just, like, runs
Don't worry
up.
about it.
She's like, here I go. Oh, arrowed. Yeah.
Yeah, so she gets shot. However, she does then rally everybody to defeat the English, and they are successful. And Wishbone's dog armor is adorable.
She says the line, England will never rise from this blow. And, like,
like, oh, honey.
I know. I was like, now France might have held their ground, but I think there are some other countries that might be, like, looking straight to camera in response to that.
Have you seen England?
Yeah. Like, okay, I think India and Hong Kong and the Falklands and Scotland would all just like to throw some 2 cents there at you, Joan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and for that matter, like, what is now the United States?
Yep.
It's not like didn't also at some point have to fight a, bloody war against the English.
England shall never rise from this blow.
Also, it took them another, 25 years to get the English out of France, but that's fine.
She's a kid. She's an enthusiastic kid.
Yeah, she's very happy. It's fine. They won. It's nice.
Yes. I wanted to ask one more, historical accuracy question, because she's like, England will never rise. And one of the soldiers says, all thanks to Joan of Arc. And in her day, was she already known as Joan of Arc? Because I wasn't sure. I know that a lot of times people with, that we refer to now with, a historical title didn't necessarily get that until, little ways after they died.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think she was actually Joan the Maid. I'll have to double check.
Yeah, the Maid of Orleans.
I'm going to check, but I'm pretty sure she was referred to as Joan the Maid in her lifetime.
Yeah. I don't think that anybody was like, hey, Attila the Hun, can you come here for a minute?
Right.
Because we gave him that name afterwards. History gave him that name later.
It's also, this is a weird little, linguistic pet peeve of mine, but since they're spending so much time being rah, rah, we're French against the English, I kind of wish they'd gone with Jean.
Yeah.
Instead of calling her Joan.
But also, I'm glad that none of those local community theater actors were doing French accents the entire episode.
Oh, yeah. And so that clearly would have been bad. Oh, yeah, no, that would have been atrocious. And I'm glad they didn't do that. But I do feel like they should have, made some nod to the fact that her name would have been pronounced differently.
Because, again, didn't do any research. What is the Arc of Joan of Arc? What is...
That actually is her father's name. Her father is Jacques d'Arc.
Got it.
It is technically her name. It's just I don't think that's the primary way people refer to her.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Still, again, because I did no research. This is weird.
Yeah. Her father is Jacques d'Arc. So so that actually is it is her last name. It's just, as I said, it's not the way you most often hear people talking about her at the time.
Right. Cool. Okay. All right. We can move past it.
So we have the soccer game. And of course the score is 1-1 because it's a soccer game. And that's always the score of every soccer game.
I was like, oh, this is the most realistic part of the episode about anything.
Right? There's that. However, I do hate the fact that, okay, I guess they decide that the whole dynamic that it's 1-1 and now you have to have a shootout is too confusing. So we have to solve that by having the women, except for Ellen, Joe's mother, who we've established is a former athlete, but the other women, Wanda and the woman who I think is supposed to be David's mother, are both what's happening? And it's it's not that hard to figure out.
No.
It says right there on the scoreboard.
Yes. And I'm sorry, your kids have been on this soccer team the whole season, right? Is this the first tie that there's been? That seems unlikely.
And if that is David's mom, then that means that her husband's the coach.
Right, but we've already established that he didn't read the rule book.
Well, true. But he at least understands the basics of the rules of soccer.
Yes.
As far as we can tell. If not the rules of the league.
Right.
So they have no idea what's going on, which I'm come on. Do we really have to have the women being what's a sport?
Yeah. See, each team sets up a goalie and then has 5 penalty kicks. And then I feel like there were not as many people on each of the soccer teams in this episode as there were on the soccer teams that I played on as at a similar age. Right. So on each side where we saw the people lining up to take the Joe was Joe was assigned to be the goalie for his team for the penalty kicks.
Right.
Which I was like, oof, bad choice because Joe sucks.
But he's the goalie the whole game, isn't he?
Yeah, but Joe in general sucks, so I'm anti-Joe. Pro-Wishbone, anti-Joe.
I mean, that's fair.
Conflict.
He's just I think, the only person with any practice being the goalie on their team, presumably.
Yes, but we see him set up as the goalie, but then we also see him taking a penalty kick towards the opposing goal.
I was wondering about that. The goalie wouldn't normally do those penalty kicks, would they?
No, not that I remember.
Yeah, that seemed wrong to me.
Yeah. But then, of course, we have the climactic sort of, it's all tied up, and it's down to the last penalty kick. And Sam steps up to the ball and kicks it into the goal. And then it's like, goal! And then she rips off her t-shirt, and everybody's scandalized at her sports bra. Just kidding.
And the sore loser coach of the very terrifying The Blast, who now I'm convinced, like, they're never that good. They just always win because their coach is an asshole and keeps like sore loser protesting all of the other team's victories.
I wasn't even clear immediately that he was the coach of the other team, so I was just like, who the fuck is this old man asshole who comes up and he's like, congratulations on scoring the most points. You do realize, of course, that you're totally against regulations. Ha ha ha. Congratulations, young lady. He's like talking directly to Sam and like congratulating her and then being like, but of course I'm gonna have to file a complaint with a big shit-eating grin on his face.
Oh, yeah.
Just fuck you, dude.
He's just like cartoonishly evil.
Yeah. And then, so it turns out that the coach, who's like, no, I submitted her name on the roster, before the game. The asshole coach is like, oh, but it has to be 48 hours before the game.
And it was probably like 40 or something.
Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, so our good guy coach, he had his kids reading to him out of the rule pamphlet, being like, no, we can totally add her to the roster. And then he didn't bother to like flip to that page himself and see where it said 48 hours because they definitely like he knew that she was going to be joining his team more than 48 hours before the game. So
because I don't understand why he delayed. Right, because it actually says explicitly that the practice, which is where he decides, okay, she can be on the team, that's on Tuesday and the game is Friday.
Yeah. So he totally had time to do it in time. He dropped the ball. I feel like
even if he'd done it Wednesday morning, that should have been enough.
He dropped the ball, so to speak. Ha 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 ha. And that means that, like, all of this sort of, like, bad feeling and pressure and blame is so likely to fall on Sam's shoulders. She's this poor, like, pre-adolescent girl who's like, oh my God, it's my fault that the game score is nullified. No, it's the fucking coach's fault. He is an adult. He is supposed to be the responsible one, and he screwed up on, like, a really basic thing.
Right, just read the rules, figure out what they are. As I said, he had plenty of time. It's not like this guy broke his leg or whatever he did, like, an hour before the game.
Had plenty of time, and he's just like, oh, come on, so, like, I might not have sent it in time, but, like, it's the spirit of things. And I'm like, dude.
I mean, he's not wrong in the sense that the other guy is being unnecessarily an asshole, but it's also like, just follow the rules, though.
At no point does he just, like, own up to the fact that it was his mistake. At no point does he say, like, oh, shit, I guess I didn't read the rules clearly, / couldn't get my act together to fucking send a letter in the mail by Wednesday. That's on me. This is my fault. I'm sorry, everybody. At no point does he say that.
And in real life, there would be other parents who are on the team who are mad that he screwed up and that because of that, they lost their win.
Yeah.
So just as Sam had a victory, but her victory ultimately is undermined, so too does Joan get captured in the middle of an actual war, taken prisoner, and sentenced to death after an unfair trial.
It is exactly the same thing. Yep.
Louis/Wishbone comes to visit her, although noticing that those English dogs, as opposed to the French dogs, trying to stop him. So my explanation to this is that because he is a dog, the English dogs, as opposed to the English humans, were the ones who were responsible for trying to prevent him from coming in.
But Jack Russell Terriers are English dogs.
Yes. Like, what kind of dog do you think the English dogs are? Like, are they like English bulldogs?
I would go with English bulldog, yeah.
So that's what we can assume. Joan says that she's happy that her country will be free, even though she's going to die. She asks Louis to write to her parents and says they should like sit together and imagine that they're under this tree that they like together back home in Domremy.
Yes, their special tree, which I don't know if that's part of Mark Twain's story. I figure it has to have been.
That is, I'm pretty sure, part of Mark Twain.
Because it's such... And honestly, I've really kind of only read the same Mark Twain books that everybody's read or whatever, seen the TV adaptations of in the 90s. But it seems like such like mushy YA colorful detail to be like, Katniss and Peeta, oh sorry, just kidding, I mean Joan and Louis used to sit underneath a special tree, and it was their special place where they were friends together. And then later, when Joan's gonna die, she's like, please remember our special friendship tree. And I was like, Mark Twain was really writing this for teenage girls, I guess.
Well, that's the thing, is that I was saying before that Mark Twain is like, this is my best book, and everybody else reading is like, buddy, And I think one of the criticisms, in fact, was that it just felt like really sentimental.
Yeah, I'm seeing that in the Wishbone adaptation, so I'm on the side of the Mark Twain critics, I guess. Not that I think it's a bad thing to be sentimental. I just think that it's a fair bit of feedback.
Right. It clearly does not have the cutting wit of many of Mark Twain's other works.
Sure. It's no bullfrog contest or whatever the fuck he wrote.
Right.
He had some frog contest. I haven't.
Is that in Huck Finn?
It's one of his short stories. He's got a short story that's something about frog jumping. I haven't read him in a while. I read
various Twain in high school, and I don't think I have since, actually. So
yeah. So somebody who's listening right now is like screaming the actual thing.
Right.
They're like, it's the thing.
Yeah, my research was mostly related to things that happened in the Middle Ages. I really just briefly looked up this novel for one or two things to see if that's where they got them from, and often it was, but yeah.
And and this was the scene where her hair is finally cut, and honestly, like, I was surprised that the scene where she went to battle, it looked like her hair had not been cut yet. Like, I would cut my hair short before I went into battle, but I was like, oh no, it wasn't until she was captured and like put on trial. Like, yes, obviously they will cut all her hair off.
Well, it's forcibly cut before she gets burned at the stake.
Exactly, because nobody wants to smell all of that burning hair. Am I right?
Yeah.
So stinky. Yep. Every time I burn a witch at the stake, I'm like, P.U.
Yeah, I think I actually did cut people's hair, and they usually like cut it all the way off, like they basically like shaved, like semi-shaved your heads. But I believe that actually was common to be done before burning people at the stake.
It makes sense as sort of a humiliation tactic, as
right. And honestly, probably also the burning hair smell.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that burning human flesh does not smell super great either.
You know, I've never thought about it.
I mean, or maybe it smells delicious. I honestly, like, just the other... I just watched...
I will just say, why would it smell different from other burning flesh, which does actually smell kind of good?
I think cooking meat smells good. I think burning meat smells burnt.
True.
But I did just finish watching the Ask the Mortician YouTube video about the Donner Party, so maybe cannibalism is, like, fresh in my mind. But I would think that the smell of burning flesh would... I mean, I don't know. Like, the screams would probably drown out the smell. Well, I know they're different senses, but still, if something
But you would be focused on the screams of the person being burned at the stake.
The sound of, like, the crackling skin and fat. Yeah. Too graphic? Anyways.
Right.
So the next thing...
I mean, it is, I will say, like, you see her being burned at the stake, which I feel like is a lot for something geared at, like... 9-year-old children-ish?
Something.
Young children.
Yeah, this is a PBS kids show. This is dark.
Like, you see her in the fire, right?
Yeah. I mean, not graphically.
I mean, it's not the most graphic. Like, it's not, like, so, like, the opening of the movie Elizabeth does, like, a really intense, like, burning at the stake scene. Mm-hmm. And this isn't that, but it is not, you can tell she's being burned at the stake, which feels like a lot.
Yeah. And honestly, I did feel a little bit like they rushed through that part of it. Like they dwelled on the whole, like, she met with the king and she got an army and she was victorious in battle. And that was really like the meat of the episode. And then they get to the end and Wishbone's like, anyways, and then she was put on trial and died. Burned at the stake. Moving on. So let me tell you a thing about
part
soccer.
of the story that they wanted to emphasize.
I'm chewing on a frisbee. A dog. Like, pay no attention to that burning young woman over there.
So Joan being burned at the stake and dying at age 19 is exactly the same as their soccer team having their victory ripped away from them because of this dumb rules violation.
It's exactly the same.
It's a just really just close parallel. I can't believe nobody ever thought of this before, actually.
Yeah, for real. Although I do, once we finish the recap, want to talk to you about how come this is not the only sort of modern parallel using Joan of Arc that decides to go like for athletics as the parallel to battle. So
interesting.
Yeah. We're coming up on the part where we do have our one like calling out gender of the episode, because they're at the sort of soccer board hearing, which also seems like way more formal than it ought to be.
I will say it is clearly just like one dude's office.
Yeah.
And I'm not even 100% sure that I would say it's definitely an office, which is like the office of the league, as opposed to just this guy who's like at work and he has an actual job, but in his like side thing, he's like the commissioner of this like kids soccer league.
He's like the county comptroller and also does soccer. But yeah, so the coach is like, I tried to follow the spirit of the rules, like, which again, he's not just acknowledging that he fucking made a mistake and apologizing. Right. And then he's like, now Sam wants to make a speech, and Sam makes a little speech about like friendship and teamwork and how the real soccer game were the friends that we made along the way. And the coach of the other team is like, yeah, but she's the one that made the only goal during the game, and she's the one that made the winning goal during the kickoff. And then the coach, David's dad, says, do you mean to suggest to me that this player who has only participated in girls' recreational soccer is the only reason we won? And it's this sort of incredulous, like, she's only played on a girls' team before. Are you saying that a girl is why we won? How dare you, good sir?
Right.
And then he pulls off a glove and slaps the other guy across the face.
And it definitely also seems like he's trying to, like, wield misogyny to his advantage in this.
I guess.
In a way that's, like, really uncomfortable, especially because she's right there. And it's like, no, I mean, she made a legit point with the whole teamwork thing, and you don't know what would have happened. But also, she was the crucial player in the game. Like, she clearly would have won MVP.
Yes.
They decide that, so because of that, the whole game doesn't, like, that the Blast actually win, which I feel like is bullshit.
Yes.
That they should have, like, made them replay the game or something, but there's no way to know that, oh, well, if she hadn't been in the game, they would have lost. Like, maybe somebody else would have been in that forward position and they still would have made the goal, because what actually happened is that, like, their team's goalie fucked up.
I mean, like, if you're an unlicensed driver and you're driving around and another car hits you, you're still ruled entirely at fault because you shouldn't have been on the road without a license. So obviously this is the same. They were an illegal soccer team against regulations. There's no way that they would have been playing, and frankly, again, because it looked like they barely had enough players to have a full team.
That's true, that they would have had to just forfeit if she hadn't been on the team.
I feel like they would have had to. So...
Yeah, so I guess that's what they're going for, but it seems kind of bullshit to me that it's just an automatic, clearly you fail, as opposed to you have to replay the game.
I agree that it's utter bullshit. Also, realistic and valuable life lesson for these children.
Yeah, that people suck.
Yeah, that people suck, and that sometimes, even when the fair thing would be for you to get what you want, you won't, because bureaucracy is bullshit.
And so is the English, because this is just like Joan of Arc having an unfair trial and then being murdered.
Now, and I just want to ask if something like historical accuracy. So in the real timeline of Joan of Arc, where she was unfair trial, burned at the stake, after she was burned at the stake, did the rest of the French people go like, oh, but you know what? Let's have a pizza party. And then they all felt better.
They did not. No,
Oh.
there was not the pizza party on the ashes of Joan's
This show
corpse, I guess.
historically inaccurate. Then just check. Not real.
I mean, I guess there could be an argument that it was her wrongful death, which was an inspiration, which helped the French eventually win the war and drive out the English. So that's kind of like having a pizza party.
Okay. Yeah.
That's really the same.
It's the same.
So yes, they have a pizza party that Wishbone is very happy
Yes.
about. Also, like, I find it really interesting that of the 3 kids, apparently 2 of them have single parents.
Yeah, it does appear that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was, I wonder if it would have been like a conscious choice or not, but I do feel as though when this show was...
I think this episode was 1995.
Yeah, well, the show was on from 1995 to 1998. And
Yeah.
somebody else other than me is free to look up, like, statistics in America about, like, the rise of divorce. But I feel like when I was a kid, when I was, say, 8 or 9 years old in 1988, 1989... My parents had been divorced for long enough that it felt normal to me because I did not actually have a lot of solid memories of them being together. But it was apparently unique enough that I definitely had friends who would ask me questions like, oh man, what's it like to have your parents be divorced? It was maybe just starting to become more common for there to be like the single parents, the latchkey kids, that kind of a thing in the late 80s, early 90s. And so obviously Wishbone, PBS, like really out here to support these latchkey kids coming home watching a show they can identify with. The real wooden sexist young boy and his charming and hyper young dog. Yeah, no, I was like, we don't get a ton from Joe out of this whole episode, but I just judged him so harshly.
Joe is really like a non-character.
Joe's a non-character, which means that while we have very little to judge him on, I will judge him on that opening scene where he's like, Sam can't play, she's a girl. And then David's like, but she's really good. And then he's like, good idea, she should play.
Hey, what if you did join the team, Sam?
I just had a great idea, Sam. You should play.
That's actually the most likely thing, is that Joe takes full credit for this as a white man, rather than giving any credit to either Sam, who is a girl, or to David, who is black.
Right.
Like, that's clearly the most likely scenario.
Right. So then he is like the equivalent of probably like the King of France being like, I won the battle against England. Me. Just to bring it back to those really solid historical parallels.
They're really just... the parallels are spooky, actually. I mean, the way in which the present repeats the past, it's shocking.
I wanted to talk about these sports parallels. When you initially reached out to me about watching this episode about Joan of Arc, I mentioned that I had just finished rewatching all of the Bill and Ted movies because, of course, the new one just recently came out. And in the first movie, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which you mentioned you had not seen and still have not seen.
No.
They are time traveling around, gathering historical characters to help them with their historical report so that they can graduate high school. And one of the people they grab is Joan of Arc. And there is a scene where they've sort of taken all of their historical figures to the mall. And each historical figure finds a thing in the mall that they sort of gravitate towards that very much, like, somehow has an affinity towards their, historical characteristics. So you've got, like, Beethoven finds, like, the piano in the mall music store and is, like, playing the piano. But Joan of Arc finds, like, a mall fucking aerobics class and ends up kind of taking charge of it. And is leading this group of ladies in aerobics.
Sure.
It always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I tried to explain it to my boyfriend when we were rewatching the Bill and Ted, and he was like, no, I mean, it seems fine. Like, people were into aerobics in the 80s. And I was like, I don't think that you maybe are as aware as I was of how much, like, Jane Fonda workout tapes were really the butt of a joke. And something to be mocked, and something that was very associated with women and therefore laughable and bad and dumb and not serious.
Right. This actually seems like it's better in the sense of emphasizing the fact that she is taking on a traditionally masculine role in some ways.
But in each case, what we have is, Middle Ages, going to war, shooting arrows, chopping people's heads off, fighting for your life and for God and country is the same as nowadays when you play sports or try to lose weight.
Right.
Just general athleticism. And
right.
It seems like I do kind of get the parallel. Like, yeah, modern sports might be the closest thing we have to medieval battles, but I don't know. I just kind of wondered your take on that, of them being like, what would Joan of Arc be doing now? Obviously something athletic. Like, no, I mean, she was called by God to go to battle. If she was here now, like, what would God be calling her to do now?
Right. I mean, if we're talking about athletics as an analogy for militarism more broadly, it kind of makes sense in the sense that to actually be a professional soldier, which Joan isn't really, which I'm going to get to in a second. So if you're talking about in a general sense, if you had a medieval knight come forward in time, they don't have a lot of skills that might be obviously applicable in the modern world, and athleticism might be one of them. Like, that I could see. But Joan, although she's really more of a leader than she is an actual particularly talented fighter.
Right.
She's really an inspiring leader, and she's inspiring because she's called by God. I mean, I feel like the actual place you would see Joan would be in like an evangelical megachurch speaking in tongues.
Or honestly.
Or like at like a Black Lives Matter rally if you wanted to take like a nicer approach.
I mean, I was just thinking, she would be an influencer of some sort. She'd be a lifestyle influencer. Joan of Arc would be like live, laugh, love.
If you wanted to have the more like, I guess,
Joan
like,
of Arc would be hashtag blessed. Hashtag blessed.
Possibility.
She would be married and she would be a boy mom.
So I do want to say that there are things about Joan that are like arguably subversive or that were perceived as such, and so that I could see her being like involved in some kind of like protest movement. I think that could be valid.
Yeah.
And that she would be inspiring in that context.
It seems to me like it seems like minimizing what she was all about and like reducing her to just the most surface element to be like, oh, well, sports, obviously.
Yeah. And it's also something that really seems to be linked to the fact that when you have a lot of these modern depictions of Joan of Arc, including this one, they go very heavy on the, look, she's a woman and she was in a battle aspect, and really light on the, she is fundamentally a religious figure.
Yes.
Which is something that I'll be talking about more in the upcoming segments.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other media that I've seen telling the Joan of Arc story was like, I don't actually think I even watched the whole movie, but I've seen like part of that Lily Sobieski movie from like, I don't know, the late 90s.
Right, I actually have not seen that yet, although at some point I probably have to.
I was going to look up the name of it, but you're aware it exists. You know the thing I'm talking about. Yeah, and I
remember when that came out.
And I kind of just remember the scene of like her in church alone praying, sort of with the beam of light shining on her, and very like godliness.
And that really, I think, is to some extent the better portrayal of Joan of Arc in some ways, rather than just focusing on the like, look, she's in a battle.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get into some of the things that they got right and wrong.
I cannot wait to hear what they got right.
First, in the Vera et Falso segment, where I'm going to be doing a few kind of little things, and then in the next section I'll delve into specifically Joan of Arc and how that all went. First of all, okay, the 100 Years' War. We are definitely in the middle, toward the end of the 100 Years' War. So the emphasis on it being this lengthy conflict does make sense, since it had begun in 1337 and it's now 1429. And the 100 Years' War is actually not 100 years, it's like 116 years.
So even the 100 Years' War is not historically accurate. Wow. Boy, the liberties that get taken.
Oh, that's at least a regular liberty that gets taken, that it's always called the 100 Years' War. And it's like, well, it's like the long 100 Years' War, I guess.
Baker's 100 Years.
Right. What this war is actually about is that it's a war over basically who has the right to rule France. And it's not that the English are just popping over and being like, hey, I'm going to conquer you, like they do with, India and a whole bunch of other places
everywhere
historically.
else. It would be so out of character for England to do that. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, they actually have a somewhat valid claim, which is that English kings, starting with Edward III, had been claiming that they get to be the kings of France due to the fact that Edward's mother, Isabella, is the daughter of King Philip IV of France. And essentially, basically, the way things go is that after a couple of Isabella's brothers, that line dies out and they go to some cousins. And based on the English perspective, they actually have the better claim by their understanding of primogeniture. The French, however, have something called the Salic law, which means that no claims made via a woman count.
I can't decide if I'm like on board with that or no, because on the one hand, very dismissive of women, but on the other hand, supporting the idea that women are not tools and property to be used as pawns in your games of land. So,
It seems to mostly be a thing that they basically trot out when they realize that they're not happy about a possible succession situation.
I mean, right. Obviously, it's just one of those, like, convenient, like, we keep this rule book in the back for when we need it. And the fact that the English were like, hey, no. Like, my grandpa married one of your princesses, so actually we own your country now, is like, yeah, I mean, I'm not super on board with that logic.
Right.
And I'm just generally aware enough of history that I do know there was a ton of like, okay, we got to marry the person from that country because then we'll own that country. But how come it doesn't mean that then that country owns you? Oh, because of the man. Okay. Yeah, well, that's dumb. Kind of on board with the French rule that you can't just, hi, I claimed your woman, so I own your country now.
Right. And especially, I will say also, it's sort of, there's a little bit of added weirdness given the fact in this particular case that Isabella, the woman herself, is a slightly controversial figure because she definitely had her husband murdered.
Well, that wasn't uncommon at the time, right? People were having each other murdered left and right.
Yeah, but everybody knew she had her husband murdered, which made it slightly different.
All right. I mean, he probably deserved it. I'm sure he had it coming.
I mean, kinda. He certainly, like, he wasn't a good ruler, and she actually was probably a better one. So there is that.
Yeah, and he was probably like a jerk to her.
He seems to have mostly had a long period where he kind of ignored her and probably preferred men.
Aha. She's like, ignore me, will you? Which is the movie that I haven't seen, but I'm aware of through cultural osmosis. A Fatal Attraction? Yeah, like she tried boiling his bunny and that didn't work, so then she had to kill him.
Right. So it's a dynamic that gets like super exaggerated in some gross homophobic ways in Braveheart, actually.
I haven't seen that. There's a lot of movies that I'm just like, I've seen enough clips and I know the elevator pitch. And then unfortunately there's a lot of classic movies that I like definitely should have seen for sort of cultural appreciation and maybe learning a little bit of history through movie, but then I waited too long to see the movie, and then now I know the person that was heavily involved in making the movie is like a horrible piece of garbage. So it makes it really hard to go back and watch at all to begin with. If I at some point get around to watching Schindler's List, which like I'm a very bad Jew, I never watched it.
I also have never watched Schindler's List because I am a terrible Jew.
I keep thinking like I should get around to watching that, and then I'm like, oof, Liam Neeson, horrible racist.
And also just like, when are you really like, fuck, I want to sit down and watch a really depressing movie about the Holocaust?
And if I'm going to do that, I'll watch Life is Beautiful. So.
Yeah. Or as far as I know, nobody's a terrible racist.
So as far as
was involved in the making of the movie.
Roberto Benigni seems like a delightful man.
Yes, he does. Yes. He seems lovely.
So I don't think I ever heard him talk in an interview about how he used to just go walking at night looking for black people to kill.
Yeah, that's something. That's a real plus.
Yeah, that's my favorite people are the people who have never done that.
Yeah. It's really really one of our lower bars for people, but
I never used to think that the bar would have to get that low.
But
here we are in 2020.
Yeah.
I denounce white supremacy. How about you?
Yes, I too denounce white supremacy. It wasn't that hard.
Super easy.
I don't understand why certain people are really struggling with being able to say, I denounce white supremacy.
Super weird. The Proud Boys are fucking neo-Nazis. They're modern day fascists.
They are. But they're standing by.
Yes, they are.
Don't worry.
I'm really in love with the reclaiming of the Proud Boy hashtag going on right now on gay Twitter. It's chef kiss. It's very good.
Yeah, it's fun. There are fun things happening.
Yes.
Amid the terrible things happening.
I don't even know what's going to happen in the next 12, 24, 36 hours of the world. And I don't even know when this episode comes out. But I just want to say that, like, I have a bottle of sparkling wine in my fridge that's been there for maybe 5 years. Like, when I helped my mom move into an assisted living facility and was clearing out her old kitchen, there was this bottle of Prosecco, and I was like, I'll put that in my fridge. And I was going to pop it open when Hillary was going to win, and didn't open it. Still in my fridge. I kind of don't think that it goes bad. I'm not enough of a wine person. I'm definitely going to fucking pop that bubbly if Trump dies of coronavirus. I'm just going to say it now. I'm saying it on the record.
Right? Yeah. I wonder if I have any fun alcohol I can open up if Trump dies.
It's good to have a celebration in mind when you've got a bottle of bubbly in the fridge. Like, exactly. What am I saving this for?
Yeah. Might just be that I have to go out and buy a bottle of champagne if Trump dies.
Yeah, it's not like it's hard to go out. It's a little bit harder to go out and buy a bottle of champagne now than it used to be, but it's not that hard.
It occurs to me that actually I am pretty sure, based on my own schedule, because I try to record things in advance, I am pretty sure this is not coming out until after the election.
Oh, God!
So this will be an interesting time capsule.
Well, if he survives, I'll pop it open when Biden wins. I do feel like that's a bit of a jinx because I super was going to pop it open when Hillary won, but I don't know. I'm not superstitious, so this is going to happen.
Yeah, we'll just...
Woo! Anyways.
I'm nervous about this election. Anyway.
Got a little bogged down there.
Identically, the French were very nervous about the English. It's the same. The other thing that I'm going to say is that, all right, so the French did see the English as being these, like, weird foreigners who had shown up and all of a sudden started, like, attacking shit in their country. And Joan herself did actually write in a letter to the King of England, I say to you in God's name, go home to your own country. That said, though, the rhetoric specifically of freedom feels a little anachronistic, since for the French peasantry in particular, it's not so much this, like, abstract, we want French national sovereignty,
right,
so much as we'd really like to not be in the middle of a war zone.
Right. If you're at the very bottom of the food chain, it doesn't make a ton of difference to you who's at the top. You just kind of want soldiers to stop tromping through your fields and, like, randomly killing and raping your women.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's this understanding that, like, these soldiers aren't even ours and they don't belong here. So the easiest solution actually should be for them to leave and stop bothering us.
Yes.
But that's not quite the same as being, like, France, national sovereignty.
Right, red, the blood of angry men.
And it is very much that, like, Joan of Arc gets adopted much later as this French nationalist heroine, which is not quite the valence that she would have had during this period.
Right. How well known would she have been in France during this period? Like, I don't know how well information was really disseminated across the country, especially when, like, peasants couldn't read and write, and there wasn't, like, a ton of traveling going on very far from where you lived or were born. So she was, I'm sure, she was the maid of Orleans, so she was known in Orleans, but where else? I mean, in Provence, were they like, did you hear about that girl Joan in Orleans? Oh my God, I heard she got burned at the stake because she totally won a battle.
Well, because the army is moving around, there is some, and she's, so she's legendary among some of the people that she fought with in particular, right? And so because of that, and because the army, those are the people who are moving the most, she does end up becoming, I would say, fairly well known and is this kind of inspiring figure. It would be somebody who's mostly, I would say, probably being talked about among French knights and soldiers as opposed to just everybody.
Right. The other shepherdesses weren't like, ooh, maybe I should say that God talked to me, because they...
Apparently not, since there doesn't seem to have been a follow-up to her. But yeah, so I would say, she does become fairly well known, but the fact that she is this inspiring figure and kind of like a religious martyr in some sense for some isn't quite the same as, like, Vive la France, which is the overall kind of impression that we get here.
Was France in this era is Catholic, right? It was Catholic.
Everybody's Catholic.
Everybody's
Catholic. This is before the Protestant Reformation. Yeah.
I didn't research it. I'm not a medievalist. I know the Magna Carta was signed in 800.
1215.
Fuck. Why do I think 800? What happened in 800?
Charlemagne gets crowned as Holy Roman Emperor in 800.
Okay, so I used to have this game. It was called, I think it was called Timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as somebody in the field of history, I feel like you would probably be like, this is a fun game that I want to get. It came with a bunch of cards. There were like 4 different colors, and the board had 4 different lines down the board corresponding with the colors for 4 different eras. So you had kind of like prehistoric era, Middle Ages, something else, and then nowadays. I haven't played it since I was like a kid. And so each card had on the front of it a historical thing. So, like, you know, dinosaurs become extinct. The Magna Carta is signed. The Wright brothers fly the airplane. And on the back of the card has the date that it happened.
And then you have to put it in order.
You don't get to look at the back of the card with the date.
Right.
So based on the event on the front, so you take turns placing the cards where you think they go in relation to each other. So the first card in any category is easy to place, and then the more cards you get, the more you're like, oh shit, did this happen before that and after this? And then you can, like, I challenge you, and we flip the cards and find out. It's kind of a fun game.
I kind of want to do the thing, so like in the movies where there's people who like get into like a card game or something and have like really high stakes and you don't know that they're really good at it until later. I kind of want to do that to like place this really big bet on me winning a game of Timeline with people who don't know I'm a historian.
Do it. I'll like find the game and send you a link to it or something. I'm sure they still make it. It was very educational. Sure, yeah. I just remember her, like, Magna Carta card. Oh, that goes here. Any knowledge I have of history just comes from playing Timelines when I was like 13 years old.
That's fair. Like, you're, I got a PhD in this, so like I spent a lot of time doing this.
When you got the card that said like Big Bang, you're like, oh, easy one. There.
Yes. At the beginning.
The beginning.
Guess it was not a religious game.
No. Science-based.
Yes.
Although there might have been a card that had to do with Jesus, just because...
I mean, he's a historical figure. Yeah.
It goes in the historical timeline.
Yeah, that's fair. So I was going to say, one other thing that I think they actually got right about the 100 Years' War is that you've got this, like, refugee dude running around in the beginning, and that is absolutely a thing that happened because, 100 Years of War, a lot of people are getting displaced as the English armies, but also sometimes the French armies are showing up and burning shit and destroying or stealing all of their food. And so people are like on the run and starving. And it also is legit that her father is at some point super suspicious because a number of those people do like become bandits.
Sure. Was it pretty legit that she, as the teenage daughter of her father, the man of the house, would have had the kind of persuasive sway over him to be like, no, come on, let's let the guy stay and feed him? And her dad, instead of being like, shut your mouth, wench, and like giving her the back of his hand, instead he's like, you make a good point, girl. Yes, I will do what you say.
The complete disregard for women does get exaggerated, and that women do have more power in the medieval world than is generally expected.
I will admit that I expect it all to be misogyny all the way down.
Not that there isn't misogyny, and it's not that it's not fundamentally a patriarchal system, but it's like very common that like your wife at least might have a decent amount of influence in terms of something like that.
Right. She would just have to lie about having a dream about her dead grandma to convince her husband to let her daughter marry the tailor instead of the butcher.
Not even necessarily. No, I'm actually like in terms of marriage, is actually there is very, very much an expectation that women play a pretty central role in making those decisions.
Sure. I mean, marriage was a business. I do know that marriage was a business arrangement at that time. That the Middle Ages was pre-concept of romantic marriage.
Right, and women are very much involved in a lot of particularly family businesses, and that being one of them. So there's actually interesting examples of this on an elite level too. So one of my favorite people, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who is she was the Queen of France and then the Queen of England because she had her marriage to the King of France annulled and then married the person who became the King of England.
Catherine Hepburn.
Yes, fabulous. And so Eleanor, in the events after The Lion in Winter, she ends up basically being the person who gets picked by the person who at that point is the King of France to go to Castile, which is one of the kingdoms in what's now Spain.
Where they make all the soap.
Right. And pick out one of her granddaughters for the King of France's son to marry. And she goes there and she like talks to the girls and she like picks the one out and she then deposits her and says, "You're marrying this one." And he says, "Great."
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So like women do have a lot of roles in the family, and they often do have a lot of influence. What's a little stranger is that children in particular would not have quite as much influence. I mean, she, it would make more sense normally for her mother to have maybe that kind of influence as opposed to her. But I think it is valid for Joan, given that she seems to have like not taken shit.
Right.
I mean, she also basically was like, God told me to go and do this, so I'm just gonna go. And she like goes and she just convinces a bunch of random men like, no, you should just let me do this.
Fucking wild. Right. And I'm forgetting that at this point she would have been having these visions for like 3 years already.
Yeah.
And her dad's like, "Oh God, just fucking, yes, shut up, fine."
Yeah, so I think it is legit for Joan in particular, and I could see other women having that kind of influence, and in particular women being in this position where they like plead with their husbands to give charity because it's a good thing to do. Like that's actually to some extent even like a trope that like women are this positive influence supposedly on men, which is misogynist in its own way, yes, but which does imply some aspect of women having influence within the household.
Right, yeah. I do understand it's a lazy mindset for me to fall back on when I'm watching anything set pre-1970 and I see a woman doing anything and I'm like, no, the men would not be letting her do that.
Yeah, women were allowed to do lots of things.
No, I just, depending on your point in history, they were either allowed to do lots of things or almost nothing.
They were allowed to do some things. But
Yeah,
I work on women's economic activities in Catalonia in the 13th and 14th century. So I have like thousands of contracts that are like women buying and selling property and women making loans.
But meanwhile, in America, in say the 1950s, a woman couldn't like get a credit card.
Oh yeah, it's actually worse in that like women actually have fewer rights in America in the 1950s than they did in Catalonia in like the 1350s. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, which is also like I tend to like get very frustrated at these like assumptions about like linear progress.
It is, I think, human nature to fall back on assuming linear progress.
Mm-hmm.
I fall back on that assumption a lot.
But as a historian, I'm like, there's very little evidence for linear progress. I mean, look at America in 2020.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid evidence against linear progress.
Yeah. Sigh.
Oh, America. Something else that they get wrong so there's that bit where Wishbone's like, don't our soldiers just run away when they see the English coming? And this is obviously linking up with this stereotype of French cowardice, which is really a post-World War II
cheese-eating
stereotype.
Surrender monkeys.
Yeah.
I can't remember where that phrase was coined.
I can't either, but that is the phrase. Mm-hmm. But it's all, that whole constellation of stereotypes is all like post-World War. I think post-World War II. It's certainly modern.
It's so dismissive of cheese that it just makes me so angry.
Like we should all be cheese eating regardless of whether we surrender.
Exactly. You don't need to slander cheese just because you think surrendering is bad.
Seriously,
God.
Cheese should always be praised.
Always.
It did get right the name of one of the English commanders. It refers to Lord Talbot, and there was indeed a John Talbot who is nicknamed the English Achilles for his military prowess, who was one of the English in command at Orléans. So that's legit. That is, however, one of the better things about the Siege of Orléans, in that, so the siege is the English laying siege to a French city,
mm-hmm.
and yet it seems in this movie like it's the French laying siege to the English.
It does. That was, I got the impression that the battle we saw in this episode of television was the French army reclaiming a piece of property that was being occupied by the English.
Yeah, that is what it would make you think.
Yes.
But in fact, it's like, so Orléans had been under siege for like a year and a half. So a very long time, but it is still like a city that is under French control. So to the extent that there is a French attack on a thing that the English are holding, it's that basically the English build these things called outworks. They build these like little temporary forts around the town that they then can launch attacks from. And there was an attack that Joan is involved in, which is where she was wounded, that's on one of these little, like, English outworks. But the whole visual would have looked really different. Like, it's not a castle.
I feel as though it would be much harder to kind of succinctly show a victorious battle defending a city, because if you're taking back the city, then you take it and you've got it and you're like, huzzah. But if you're defending it, like,
get them to stop besieging
you're
you,
pushing
is basically what they did.
Back at them. You're going to the outskirts of town where their army is, and you're fighting them, and you're just pushing them like a little further back past the outskirts, and you're like, now don't you come back after this.
Right, and you're kind of routing them, as I said, at these like little temporary forts that they've built, basically.
Yeah.
So like you basically get them so basically like the victory is that they get them, the English, to retreat and to abandon the siege and to just give up on trying to take Orleans.
Yeah, that would be a lot messier to show cinematically in Dallas Community Theater staging.
Right.
Yeah.
Though I will say, for something that is like super low budget, it's not the worst depiction of like, in theory, how siege warfare would work. It's just not quite right in terms of what the dynamic actually was at the Siege of Orleans. Yeah. But you do see, you know, the importance of archery. You see some siege ladders. Like, those are legit.
I don't know. Like, obviously, archers would be trained to sort of, like, aim for the parts that are not armored on your body. But the fact that she had this, like, full breastplate, and she's like, here we go, I've got my armor on, and is immediately like, oh, the arrow got me right where I don't have armor on. Oh.
Although that wound actually was real. And fun fact, her confessor at least later claimed that she had predicted the wound in advance.
I mean, if I had predicted that I would get wounded,
it would probably be in the part where I wasn't wearing armor.
Yes, not only that, I would predict that I would get wounded in the part where I wasn't wearing armor, but also if I try to put myself in the mindset of somebody who truly did have that level of faith in God, legit believed in heaven, legit believed in sacrifice for my faith and country and martyrdom and all of that good shit, and I wanted to kind of prove that my predictions carried weight, I'm not going to say I would jump in front of an arrow, but maybe I wouldn't be like super dodgy.
And she also, again, you know, in terms of this real person, like, she doesn't have military training. Right. She's a young woman who, like, started getting these visions, and God told her to do this. You know, she is not really battle trained in the way that other people might be.
If I were going into battle, I would also predict that I would be injured. And I think I would be right.
Right? It's a pretty safe prediction.
Yeah.
So that then is going to lead into the next segment, the Historia ad Veritas, where I talk a little bit about the real Joan of Arc. So she is indeed the daughter of a peasant from Domremy, and inspired by visions to lead the French against the English. And one of the things also to note is, in terms of where she's coming from on this, is that Joan is living like right at the center of a war zone. She's like this town is like right on the frontier between territory that's held by the English and territory that's held by the French. And so to some extent it makes a lot of sense that if she's having these mental experiences, that they might then be connected in her mind with the war, because the war is very, very apparent in her life.
Right.
Because of where she lives. She arrives at age 16 at the castle of the man who would come to be King Charles VII. She, by the way, before this, there was like another fortress that she went to, and the guy was just like, I feel like I don't know what to do with you, and maybe you're a witch. And she just talks him into the fact that, no, I'm not a witch, send me to the Dauphin, to the prince, basically. And at some point he's like, all right, yeah, sure, I guess. So she has like apparently like managed to like talk a bunch of men into a bunch of shit.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, hard to wrap my head around having that much faith in God.
But also, like, she, I bet, was like intense.
Yeah, also, I mean, I feel like there's a level of harmlessness associated with like just being a young, she's just hi, I'm just an innocent shepherdess girl, what harm could I do? And in the same way that if somebody brought a dog to your indoor soccer game, you might be like, you know what, as long as the dog's like not making any fuss, it's fine, the dog can stay. So that first guy that she talked to might have been like, I mean, like, I guess it's not, like, I am not invested in this, but it's not hurting anything, so I guess go talk to somebody else about it, but I won't burn you at the stake, I guess, whatever. I can't say for the second guy should talk to the Dauphin, who was like, you make a convincing point. I see. God, armies? Right. Yes. Obviously, she was very persuasive to him, but other people that she spoke to just might have been like, this is not worth the pushback. Yeah.
Potentially. But he also, like, he's in a weird position, much more so even than what's implied in the show. Because so his father has died like 4 years before, but this dude still hasn't been crowned. Basically because so his father, who was probably not entirely in sound mind at the time that this happened, signed this treaty saying that his heir was going to be the King of England. So kind of agreeing to this. And so some were like, yeah, fuck that. And some people are like, maybe this is because he really knew that his son was illegitimate. And then they were like, well, and maybe we still don't want the King of England, but like, here's a cousin and we'll take him. Because of all of this, and because of the fact that like the English have been there for like 80 years and have control of a bunch of territory, he still hasn't been crowned, and therefore, despite the fact that he is supposed to be the king, he's still referred to as the Dauphin, so essentially the prince, and also is sometimes mockingly referred to as the King of Bourges, referring to the city that like he basically has this very small geographical area that he actually has control over. He ends up not actually being crowned until 1429, after Joan has helped to lift the siege at Orleans. So he has a sense, at least ultimately, of like actually owing a lot to her, and she very much is, and his connection with an alliance with her is actually like really working to enhance his own prestige and reputation, which he has like failed to establish.
She was also dead at that point, right?
No, because she does it because the show makes it seem like she dies right after the siege.
Yeah, are you telling me this show's not accurate? Sarah.
It's not. I'm sorry. Because, so the siege is lifted in 1429, and she makes it all the way to 1431.
Oh, well, shit, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he basically, like, him actually managing to be crowned is very much due in part to the fact that, like, we've had this whole big deal that, like, she's, like, been crucial in lifting the siege at Orleans, and everybody's, like, talking about this person, Joan.
Was she just, like, in an English prison for 2 years, or was she...
No.
Okay, so...
No, she was, like, running around with the French armies for 2 years.
So she was not captured at the Battle of Orleans?
No.
Okay. So
no, she was captured at a much late. I didn't write down where it was, but she was captured like at a significantly later battle.
According to Wishbone timeline, she had her like inaugural battle and was immediately like, "Oh, arrow, yoink, captured. Oh, convicted. Right. Dead." Like so fast.
Yeah, the real Joan is running around with the French armies and like at the king's coronation and doing shit for like 2 years.
And presumably dressed somewhat masculinely. I think I read in the notes that you sent me that one of the accusations against her was cross-dressing, basically.
Yeah, I mean, she's dressed in men's clothes and sometimes, like, armor.
Yeah.
Because she's in battles.
Yes.
Like, you don't want to be wearing a dress in those.
No.
Yeah. The big other thing is that the show, as I've mentioned before, really de-emphasizes the religious aspect of all of this. And really, I think to some extent, thinking about her as a woman warrior isn't actually the most useful way to think about her, as opposed to connecting her with all of these women visionaries in this period who claim this very personal connection with God. Joan also did understand her mission in these fundamentally religious terms. She describes herself as being sent by the King of Heaven. She, during her trial, states that starting at age 13, she's been guided by a voice from God, that she also sometimes identifies as being linked to an angel, and sometimes also talks about appearances and guidance that she has from various saints. Saints Catherine, Margaret, and Michael are the big ones. At first, the voice just taught her to be good and to go to church often, but then was like you must like come to basically the part of the kingdom that's actually like under French control, and that then like you should like do all of this other stuff. And she says basically that literally every single thing she does, like, God told her to do.
Like, down to the details of battle strategy. Like, God was like, look, you want to take a flank over to the east, and then you're going to pinch in from the west and surround them. And then God was like, you need archers in the back.
Usually not quite that much detail, but it does say that, like, she does basically keep insisting that, like, yeah, every single thing that I did was specifically under God's direction.
They got one of those big tables that's a map with little armies and like a little shuffleboard pusher, and she's on one side of the table and God's on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
And he's got the little stick and he's like, you want to push these guys over there and these guys over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically, and like including that she also was like, yeah, no, I'm wearing men's clothes because God told me to.
Yeah.
She also is amazingly snarky in some of this testimony. At some point, she is asked if Saint Margaret spoke in the English tongue, to which she responds, why should she speak English when she is not on the English side? Which, like, good for you, kid.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the trial itself is also really fundamentally about religion. So first of all, the way things work is that there are courts that are fundamentally secular courts, and there are church courts. And the question of which has jurisdiction depends on a combination of things, but basically it's a combination of what the crime is and what the status of the person being tried is. So for example, if you're a cleric, even if you like commit murder, you go to a church court because you're a cleric.
Kind of like in
or at least the church is going to fight for that.
Modern times, how if a soldier commits murder, they're court-martialed in soldier court, and if soldier court is like, no, it's fine what you did, then they end up facing no consequences. There was a recent case of that I sadly read about, so that's cool. Cool.
Yeah, exactly the same thing with the church courts. But it also is, in this particular case, has to do with the crimes that you're being tried for. Because she doesn't get tried for, say, committing treason against the king because the English king thinks that he's, sees himself as being her king. She gets tried by a church court because she's accused of heresy, witchcraft, and cross-dressing, which are church crimes.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, super church. Man, I'm always heresying all over the place.
Yeah.
Church better not find me.
Yeah, so that's what the crime is. And so like at the opening of the trial, as they're talking about her, the cross-dressing is actually like really, and the heresy is really what it gets emphasized. So it says that the reputation of this woman had already gone forth into many parts, how wholly forgetful of womanly honesty, and having thrown off the bonds of shame, careless of all the modesty of womankind, she wore with an astonishing and monstrous brazenness immodest garments belonging to the male sex.
I would imagine that a lot of the men's garments that she wore showed a bit less chest flesh than your traditional women's garments.
Right, they're probably more modest.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that you have like pants and they can like technically figure out the shape of your legs versus a skirt.
Oh my god, I can identify you as having two legs and not just being like a wooden single peg, like a little Playmobil person who's just not got two separate articulate legs. Scandal.
Yeah, so that's basically like, that's one of the central like problems and accusations is her wearing men's clothing. And then they also add that she is going around and was not afraid to perform, speak, and disseminate many things contrary to the Catholic faith and hurtful to the articles of the Orthodox belief. Yeah, that basically like her claim that she's like hearing the voice of God and that she's not mediated by any like dudes, and also like the way that she's presenting the voice of God and what God is saying to her. All of that is seen as being just religiously questionable by some individuals. The articles of accusation ultimately called for her to be denounced and declared as a witch, enchantress, false prophet, a caller-up of evil spirits, as superstitious, implicated in and given to magic arts, thinking evil in our Catholic faith, schismatic in the article Unum Sanctum, and in many articles of our faith, skeptic and devious, sacrilegious, idolatrous, apostate of the faith, accursed, and working evil, blasphemous toward God and his saints, scandalous, seditious, perturbing and obstructing the peace, inciting to war, cruelly thirsting for human blood,
inciting to war,
it to be
but
shed.
they were at war.
Right, it's that like you are then inciting them to like continue the war that they're already in.
She was currently at war when she started doing war. How can they accuse her of inciting it?
Right. Yeah, and it's also like y'all started this war.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people who are like these are people who are French but who are collaborating with the English.
Right.
It's like the English started it. Like
regardless of who started it, Joan didn't start it.
No, she certainly didn't.
No. That's just wild to me. Oh, and like,
yeah.
There was something else you said in the list there that I was like, They really just threw every charge at her that was possible. It's already gone out of my head. There was something that was just like, no. That's a big old hypocrite.
Yeah, no, it's like this intensely long list. It also complains of the fact that she like let people kiss her hands, which implies that she's letting people venerate her like a saint, even though she's like not dead.
I mean, from a Catholic standpoint, that's maybe the only thing I'm hearing where I'm like, you make a good point.
But it's also like, that's not that uncommon with people who have a reputation for sanctity during their lifetime.
Sure. I should start making people, well, maybe not during the pandemic. After the pandemic, I'm going to start making people kiss my hand. Yeah. I'll get like a really big ring.
Yeah. That's COVID friendly. If you sanitize it between every kiss.
After COVID just like disappears any day now, it's just gonna go away without us doing anything. After that happens, we get a big ring and have people kiss it.
She does end up briefly recanting. So basically at some point they're like, so all right, now we're going to transfer you to the secular authorities to be executed, because the church is not allowed technically to execute people. They have to transfer you back to the secular government powers in order for you to be executed.
Right. I think if the church wants to execute somebody, the way they have to do it is walk outside and say, who will rid me of that meddlesome priest?
Sure, although that's what the king said.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. That's how you execute it. I got it flipped around. That is how you execute somebody who's a member of the church.
That's how you execute somebody who hasn't actually done anything like that should justify you being executed.
I mean, Peter O'Toole, what can you say?
With the way the church works, like, they come to these verdicts that declare people guilty and things for which the penalty is death, but like they are not supposed to shed blood. And so because of it, it's this very like letter of the law and not the spirit of the law thing, that it's like, so we're not going to kill you, we're going to walk you over next door to these other people and they're going to kill you.
It's the Shabbos Goy version of murdering somebody.
Exactly. Like, it's like, okay, yes, like, exactly. It's a Shabbos Goy version of judicial murder.
Yeah.
They are like, okay, so we're going to do this. And she's like, oh, fuck, I don't want to actually die. So she recants.
Oh,
but then,
seriously?
Like,
didn't she, like, get sainthood?
So she recants, but then, like, 2 days later, she's like, yeah, no, fuck that. And they come to visit her, and she's wearing men's clothing again.
She recants.
Yeah, she's like wearing men's clothing again, and she's like, I talked to Margaret and Catherine, and they were like, you shouldn't have done that. This means that she then gets to be condemned as not only a heretic, but a relapsed heretic, which means straight to the stake. She then, however, in 1456, 25 years after she was killed, the Pope at that time, Pope Calixtus III, revokes this sentence of heresy. And then many years later, not until the 20th century, she is formally canonized as a saint.
It wasn't until the 20th century?
Yeah.
I fully figured it would have been earlier. In order to be a saint, you've got to have some miracles, right? What were her miracles?
So Joan is actually exempt from some of the miracle rules because she's a martyr.
Oh, okay.
Martyrs get a pass, but she also does have some miracles. There's some miraculous healings. So some nuns who got healed from cancer, apparently. And she also healed a woman from tuberculosis and someone who had a hole in her foot.
A hole all the way through her foot?
That's what it says.
Okay, cool. That's something. To me, that's the significant one. Miraculously cured cancer. I'm like, I don't know, spontaneous remission, but a physical hole through your actual foot?
Like, all right, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
Yeah, some people okay with leg ulcers, but yeah, a lot of healing miracles that Joan was ostensibly responsible for.
Feels like kind of the easiest cop-out miracle to claim. Like, oh, I had a fever and then I met her and my fever went away. It was a miracle.
The next section, the Fabula Nostra, is where we can each come up with a piece of media inspired by this one.
All right. I gotta go first?
Yeah, you want to go first?
What I really want to see is, a little switcheroo where it's the same structure and format. You've got Joe and his friends and Wishbone, and you've got flashbacks to the Middle Ages. Only we're just gonna, because the storylines are so exactly equal, They're the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually say that Joe and David they're part of an army and they need somebody to lead them. And so Sam is going to lead them into bloody battle. And Wishbone and Joan of Arc are going to be playing in a big soccer game, France against England. Like, I just want to see them because the parallels are so exact. I just want to go ahead
it's very precise.
Just flip them and reshoot it.
So what I'd like to do is, I think that if we do a Wishbone reboot, I think we should have a lady dog who gets to play the lady roles.
Yes.
In history. So I want to see the new Wishbone as actually playing Joan, in part because there was not enough dog armor and we need more dog armor.
Now, would Joan's friend Louis still then also be played by a dog? So we've just more dogs?
I mean, we could just have all dogs, but I mean, or Louis could be human now and Joan's a dog.
Right. So we've got like Louis played by like Adam Driver and then dog Joan of Arc. I'm on board.
Yeah.
And then would dog Joan have like the wig? Yeah, okay, good.
It would just have that wig, but you just put it on a dog
same
now.
Wig, yep.
Basically the same wig. Yeah, basically the same wig and then just more dog armor.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really all I want. I really just want to see like a dog in a great costume.
Yes. I'll send you my a picture of my Jack Russell Terrier in the little costumes that my mom made for my dogs years ago. Dogs in costumes are good.
I'm sure you have seen there is one photo of my dog in costume, which is that I, a couple of years ago for Halloween, bought my dog a Pope costume.
I have seen
because
that.
her name is Opie, and I was like, she can be Popey, and this is a very good joke.
It's a very good joke.
So, at this point, we can now move into the
estimatio section,
which is where we rate this on a scale of 1 to 5 based on whatever criteria you see fit.
Well, I mean, we get a bunch of points for Wishbone the dog, and we get
Clearly.
a bunch of points, honestly, for the theme song. When I started the episode, it's been a long time since I've like watched any Wishbone, and when that opening theme started, I was filled with an unexpected amount of joy of just like, I love this.
I sang along to the theme song.
What story,
100%.
Wishbone. So I just basically have to like knock off a point for Joe sucking, so I'll give it 4 out of 5.
Yeah. This obviously was like not the most historically accurate retelling of Joan of Arc, but also for something that's geared toward like 9-year-olds. I don't know. It's not that bad. You know, maybe it would inspire somebody to like read an actual book about Joan of Arc. You know.
Right. But you don't have to take my word for it. I'm kind of surprised it didn't end with sort of that.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, so that's clearly like kind of the point of Wishbone, is that it's like, you know, it doesn't really like tell you that much about what happens in these classic works of literature, but it's like, go read a book for yourself is like very much the whole attitude. So like, I don't, you know, I'll allow it. The thing that is too bad is that in the Middle Ages part, it doesn't actually pass a test that I have.
Uh-oh.
So I have a test which I've invented, which is the only thing that is a lower bar than the Bechdel test.
Oh.
Which is that there has to be at least one named woman who doesn't die.
Oh. Yeah, no, we didn't have that.
And we don't have that,
I mean,
which is...
I'm trying to think how many named people there were in the historical part. There was Louis.
I mean, 3.
Right, so...
There's Joan, Louis, and...
the king.
And the king. I think they said his name is Charles. I'll give the king as being a named character.
So really, a third of the named characters were women.
True.
But yeah, it does fail a test
still,
of her not dying.
It does fail that test.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like, you know, there's a dog and the dog's wearing armor.
Yeah.
And it's very cute.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna come down at a 4.
Such a fair rating. It's a little
I mean,
wild.
my criteria is very subjective.
The fact that Wishbone as a show really was kind of like, oh, we're encouraging kids to like want to learn more about this and go pick up the book, right? In the same way that Reading Rainbow would have like, oh, here's a little book report, go check out the book. But like Reading Rainbow, which was a show on PBS for kids, same as Wishbone was. Mm-hmm. I felt like the books were a bit more age appropriate. They're like, hi, we're a show. We're a show for like 8-year-olds, and we're recommending a book that's like appropriate for an 8-year-old. And Wishbone was like, we're a show for like 11-year-olds. We're recommending a book that would be like on your college syllabus. Go read The Count of Monte Cristo. Why don't you?
Right. Go read there actually is a Hunchback of Notre Dame episode, which is also medieval.
Right.
The Hunt Dog of Notre Dame. So, Rachel, are there places where the listeners could find you on the internet?
Oh, yes. Find me on the internet, because if you show up at my house, I'll be unnerved. People can find me on Twitter if they want, or Instagram. Both places, it's Rachtacular, because when when MySpace let you pick a custom URL for your MySpace page, I was like, this will be cool. It's like Rachel plus Spectacular, Rachtacular, and it just became my handle. So Twitter, where I like retweet like very leftist political tweets, and then Instagram, where I post screenshots of people who were on Murder, She Wrote, who I recognize from other things. That's, and like pictures of my dog.
Always good. So you can find Rachel there. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts. And I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval-pod and join our Facebook group. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah If Decker. And finally, if you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.